Dr. Jazz.
To one album, Old Songs New,
Jazz.
by Denonette with Lee Konitz.
Right.
And how does your story with Lee go? I mean, I wanted to ask you because there's such a beautiful album. I mean, I know him and Ohad had a long story together, but like, how did you end up in that lineup actually?
Well, I had been working with Lee sort of off and on for about 10 years, really his last decade of performing. And I knew Ohad, and of course, we worked together on various other projects, but also the fact that Ohad had this very strong relationship with Lee. And he always wanted to do well. He had done some other projects with Lee that involved string quartets and larger ensembles, and this was a project that he wanted to do with Lee for quite a while, where he would ask Lee, what are some of the the tunes associated with Frank Sinatra that you would love to do. And then Ohad put the idea to paper, and came up with these very striking arrangements. Slightly dark in a way because of the two cellos and the viola as the string back up to the clarinet, bass clarinet, and flute.
Clarinet,
but anyway, the point being that he always wanted to use me on this project, and I think we had tried to get the regular bass player that I'd been playing with Lee in the quartet situations, Jeremy Stratton, but he wasn't available. And the other striking feature was that there was no piano in this ensemble, which is not unusual. It's just I think Ohad wanted to keep it. That the ensemble was supposed to be the piano, basically.
Yeah.
My connection with Lee, though, does go back to 1992. When I first got to play with him a couple times in the Boston area, there was a 12-year gap between 1992 and then the next time I got to play with Lee, which was around 2004, where we actually tried to get him to play with a consistent rhythm section, because he was prone to be playing with whoever called him up, and he'd go to Europe and he'd play with all these different rhythm sections, and that was his prerogative, and again, that's not so unusual for horn players to do, when they can't really take their own quartets around. In any case, it was a trio idea, and it was my brother Ed Schuller and myself, my brother playing bass, and so we had this trio idea for about almost 2 years.
Did you guys record something with that one?
Well, not necessarily, but there are some live recordings.
I have to find it.
That captured us. So I think we did the AMR Jazz Festival in Geneva.
Okay, wow, super.
And they recorded us at the Bimhuis, the old one, I think, before they moved to the new one, and a couple, things like that. But there was no formal idea to record us. And again, Lee, it's funny. His idea of putting a recording together was not necessarily, okay, I got a trio, let's do this, and let's build to show up at the Avatar or one of the great recording studios here in New York. It was just to get some gigs and get some playing, and then somebody else would suggest, okay, let's put Lee with Joey Barron and Gary Peacock and Bill Frisell and there's Brad Meldau and Charlie Hayden, and we think that will sell. And so I was in this sort of limbo position of being, not completely ignored or forgotten about. It's just, I don't think Lee put the effort to say, I want to record with this, my group. I think it was too hard for him to think that way. Something like that. Or, he was always getting these very lucrative recording deals with other musicians, perhaps well-known musicians, and with the idea that those would sell. And Lee wasn't going to change up his repertoire that much anyway for various projects. I mean, it seemed like he recorded All the Things You Are about 3,000 times.
Exactly.
And or one of his line tunes like Subconsciously and Carrie's Trance. And so I don't, it's not like it was a missed opportunity, because I was so honored to have been with Lee those years, and especially the last 10 years, and to travel with him, and to go to Europe and play in some major festivals.
Touring.
Well, I mean, it was interesting. I mean, there was look, the playing opportunity was beautiful most of the time. Probably 95% of the time, and then there were times when Lee was a little tired, or things didn't quite work out in terms of what we did best. You always have maybe one gig that just doesn't come across, but you think it might, and maybe 10 years later, if I heard it, I'd go, wow, we played great.
Exactly.
You don't know. But most of the time, it was just an amazing situation to be accompanying him. The thing that you had to be considerate of is his age, and the things that you had to do to make sure that he was comfortable, and the people we were playing for knew what they were getting from Lee at age 88, 89, 90. And that, you weren't going to get Lee from the 50s or 60s, you weren't going to get lots of fast tempos, that things were going to be fairly subdued and introspective, and, that all those favorite tunes of his were going to be a bit slower in approach. But with love and with and being again mindful of what he's capable of doing at that age, and it still was remarkable. The melodies that he weaved, the sound was still there. That big fat sound of his, that never wavered. And then the chances to play with a great young pianist named Dan Tepfer.
Oh, sure. Yeah. They played a lot together,
Right. And they did quite a few things. And Dan was motivated to do a lot of duo recordings with Lee, that came out in that time span. And then the other pianist that we got to play with quite a bit was Florian Weber, who a remarkable pianist,
he's amazing,
from Germany. And so those were special opportunities to work with those two musicians. And then of course the bass player Jeremy Stratton, who we still play together to this day, and Jeremy's a beautiful bass player. So it was wonderful. There are stories with Lee, of the experience of traveling with him and understanding where he's coming from. And
did he share some of the stories, when you were touring?
Well, I mean, I don't know if I can share too many, but
no, I mean, if you did with you guys, but
most of the times it was sort of deflecting possible problems.
Okay.
He was a bit of a curmudgeon, and he didn't like people who were on their cell phones often, and that could cause a little friction, and he could be, suddenly barking at these people who are just mindful of their own, what who they're talking to. And, if they're next to us while we're sitting in, waiting to get on the plane, Lee would suddenly say, yap, 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 or, some kind of, indication that he wasn't happy with them talking next to us.
I see it, man. I see it, actually.
And, we'd have to sort of say, we're sorry, please don't mind us. And then I'd have to sort of tell Lee, come on, man, just let the guy talk, and we can move over here and move away, or things like that,
Yeah, sure.
I can tell you that, restaurants were a challenge to us too. If we were going to some restaurant and we had a day off or night off, like in Vienna or whatever towns we were in, cities, we'd go into a restaurant and they'd be playing piping big, loud music. And he'd suddenly turn around and we'd leave that restaurant, even though it was a great restaurant, and we'd have to look for somewhere else. I think this happened really, it was in Brussels. And we must have gone into 4 or 5 different restaurants before we found somewhere where it was kind of quiet.
Oh, shit,
that we could have our table at, at some end where there's no other, people around. He was very sensitive about, the noises around him. And as much as I would try to, keep the conversation going so he'd be focused on us as a group talking to each other, he'd still like pop his head up and say, who's that? Why are you talking? Please don't, and it was tough at times. But Lee was a character, and very opinionated. And if most of the time it was just a great. I tried to grill him about his history and tried to ask him about playing with, of course, all the greats that he played with.
Yeah.
Some anecdotes came out. Others were, really hard to get him to remember things and recall things. Again, he's like in his mid to late 80s.
Yeah.
So, now that I've been somewhat in charge of his archive, and going through a lot of his recordings, and then finding all these interviews that he did, either with Phil Shapp on WKCR or just other, radio, not that many TV interviews, but a lot of radio interviews. And, you get the personality there as well as the recall.
Yeah.
Things that he, remembered in the early 90s, mid 90s about his past from the 40s and 50s. And so we're trying to piece together a lot of things that might have been missed in the interim.
Fantastic. Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah, I always love these jazz histories. Just, when the guys are still alive, I think we don't ask them enough in a way. When you're on tour, you're like kind of in this, like you say, in a different mode, like finding a restaurant. It's not like, well, how was it in 1945 or whatever, So, but it's good.
It's tough to get, you don't want to, it's partly because of, this guy's a hero of mine. And then, secondly, we may have just played, or we're about to play. So we don't want to be too distracting. And there's, kind of joking around, or, talking about other things, politics maybe, or world events. Or, it's tough when you're in that position. There are other people who are more receptive to some historical questions that I may have about jazz and what they were up to. People who are more willing to talk about their history, whereas Lee was, just probably thinking, "Oh, I don't remember that, so I don't know how to answer that, and let's not talk about that." Things like that. The book that Andy Hamilton put together, I'm really I admire his job, Andy Hamilton's job of really piecing that together, and the way the book is structured. It's a really great book, and it really gets into some deep areas of Lee's thoughts and reflections on the Tristano period and Warren Marsh and things like that, and and who he thinks about Bird and Paul Desmond, and all those beautiful yet sometimes touchy areas.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I love that. Like I was now on tour in October with Bob Moses and Ariel Anderson, and we played music, and then like one night we finished the gig earlier, and somehow it happened. We were in the lobby of the hotel and started drinking, beers and wine. And those two guys just opened up, and it was like until 2 a.m., they were just like piling on each other. Yeah, in 68 when Eric Dolphy came, Bob was saying, and then like Arnold was like, yeah, that year I was with Sonny Rollins. I was like, man. And there's like me, this kid, like, man, okay, that's so cool, like,
yeah, that's where you wish you had a little tape recorder, and where
man, I was
taping. Yeah, I had that same similar. It reminds me of the time I was hanging out with Attila Zoller and George
I love
Mraz.
this guy. Oof, yeah.
And George Mraz, and because they're like-minded Eastern European characters, and the drinking started, and man, the stories started flying out, and it was just great. It got even out and more out, as the night went on. Yeah. And this guy, Chris Neville, who was the pianist, and we were just like, oh my God, what, again, you wish you had somebody record all these stories that came out.
Yeah.
But that's great that you got to play with Bob Moses. Look, he's one of the great, unique drummers of all time.
Definitely.
And I had I stayed with him for about 4 lessons.
Oh, really?
Back when he was at the New England Conservatory. This was, mid 80s, I think. I graduated from NEC, but I wanted to still, understand his vibe, and where did he come up with that triplet kind of thing that he does? Just like an amazing feel and everything. And so I had a chance to work with him a couple. Well, as I said, only 4 lessons. But Bob is one of my heroes, and I'm hoping that he's doing well these days.
Yeah, he has like the second revival, kind of playing a lot now in Europe, and
I think he was just there.
Wasn't
he?
We had a tour in October, like a 17-day tour, and now he was again in Spain, I think, in December. So.
Oh, good. Yeah, okay. Yeah. I didn't know that was you.
Yeah.
So you try to bring him over as much as possible. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, we had we had like 16 gigs in 17 days, which was quite. With those two guys, 77 and 75, I was like torturing them, but they survived.
And his vibe was very cool. He was very, accepting the situation of traveling that much.
Yeah, I mean, always when we came to the town, those guys went just to the hotel to sleep. I mean, it makes sense. You're tired, and you were driving 4 hours, and so they rested a lot. And but yeah, it's like you said with Lee, it's also with Bob was picking restaurants. He's like on a special diet, so you come to this amazing restaurant and he would just have salad, like man, or stuff like that. So, but yeah, it's always interesting to play with the elders. It's a completely different vibe than playing with your own age.
Sure. Yeah.
It's learning experience.
Yeah. You have to definitely be respectful of where they come from and what they're all about.
Definitely. Yeah. But you mentioned NEC. Like, can I go just a little bit back? I mean, obviously your father and brother are really strong musical connections there, but what was like for jazz drumming, or let's say drumming, your main impulse that you decided to go for drums? I mean, your brother already played double bass, and
Yeah, I mean, look, we grew up in a musical household. I got the drum bug pretty early on, around when I was at age 11.
Oh wow, already.
Uh,
Wow. Early.
because I was well, I spent many summers at Tanglewood, which was the summer home of the Boston Symphony
Yeah.
Orchestra, and then my father was there as artistic director for the students who were there at Tanglewood, who had learned from some of the teachers in the BSO.
Mm.
So I had been there since 1963 as a 4-year-old, all the
Wow.
way till I was in my early 20s, working there at Tanglewood in those last 6 or 7 years, 7 summers, as a recording engineer.
Okay.
But then there were these off chances of hearing some jazz in Berkshires, in Lenox or Stockbridge, and even I got to play a little bit. But early on, I think it was in 19. Let me see if I can do the 1969, I think,
Wow.
or 70. There were these little parties after the concerts, and there was this jazz group, and there was a drummer who was a percussionist. He was a percussionist in the student orchestra, but he could play jazz drums, and he sounded great. And that suddenly, it just dawned on me. I don't know, as a little kid, I said to my parents, I'd love to do that, So they set me up with him. He was my first teacher, with a little pad and all
Oh,
that.
wow.
And then that fall, I think I started to study with Frank Epstein, who was one of the great percussionists, specializing in crash cymbals, with the Boston Symphony, and he
Yeah.
was teaching at the New England Conservatory. So that was in the preparatory division, which is for the younger students who are still in grade school and things like that. Eventually, when I got through high school, I was starting to play even jazz drums, and getting my shit together, basically, and playing in musicals.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But the decision of coming out of a prep school and going directly into New England Conservatory, that was a pretty, I guess I would say, heady decision, because it's such a different world from the prep
Yeah.
school, going
Yeah.
into an urban school right in the middle of Boston, New England Conservatory. And all these young freshmen coming in were so far ahead of what I was going through as a musician, because my prep school didn't quite have the strong music department, and I kind of breezed through whatever they had anyway. But I was getting my chances to play jazz with either my brother or some other musicians that I met in my senior year at high school, who to this day I still have connections with and play with. And I would actually go to another prep school and play with them. And these, we were all very young, and trying out Blue and Boogie. We played that, or we play Take Five, or we play I don't know, some other heads, bebop heads, and a few standards in there. And I have early recordings of all that. It's
Oh
just,
man, really? Oh wow.
we were all pretty naive, and these are actually, this was my junior year. I think I started playing with these guys in another town in Massachusetts. But anyway, so I was getting my licks and chances, and when I got to the conservatory, like there was a little bit of because my dad was there as president, that they were going to accept me no matter what. Even if my spang-a-lang wasn't really happening. But I remember auditioning for George Russell.
Oh wow.
And he said, yeah, you're pretty good for a Schuller, or something like that, because my brother had proceeded there. He was actually at the New England Conservatory in 73, 74, I think 75, and left because he got a gig with Pat Martino.
Yeah.
So he never graduated from the conservatory. He started to, he was suddenly a professional musician touring. and moved to New York. But for me, I decided, I wanted to go the whole 9 yards with the New England Conservatory. But again, I had to catch up, with theory and harmony and even jazz arranging and things like that, which I got a chance to do in my freshman and junior years. The drumming was a little bit behind, and then I changed from one drum teacher to another, and finally this guy, Pat Hollenbeck, really realized I was going in the wrong direction and took me to the beginning of, just getting my chops together, because it was all screwed up. And so that I felt more relaxed if I was to play. And so he turned me around, and I decided to add one more year. So I did the 5-year program at NEC. And I think in my 4th year, I wasn't quite ready to forget that phone call. That I wasn't quite ready to do my recital. So, I just took another year to prepare and get one, more chances to perform with the ensembles. One of the ensembles I got to play with for several years or semesters in a row was with George Russell.
Wow.
Which was a extreme learning experience. It was kind of these things that end up at you show up at 10 in the morning, and he counts off aesthetic, so you're playing this at that tempo, and man, you're sweating and you're all looking beastly by the end of that. It's a 2-hour ensemble starting at 10 a.m. and it was always hot, and we were always schlepping our drums into these rooms, and but it was an experience with George. He was hard on rhythm sections, but somehow I must have learned something from him, in terms of all that.
Yeah.
I also got to play in the big band with him when he did his larger pieces. Also a chance to play with, did something with Jimmy Giuffre, who was there at that time.
Really? Oh, wow, man.
He also was, had the big band for one semester. And then all these great fellow students that were with me in that grade. So anyway, it was a good time to be there. That generation of musicians who gravitated to New York eventually. I stayed in Boston for another 12 years playing on the scene, and then I finally made my decision to go to New York by 1994. I see you have some time left here, but you're cool with that, right?
Yeah, I think we'll just have to log back in on the same link, when this is closed.
Yeah.
It's I wanted to ask you about this, post NEC era, because your band Orange and Blue, I talked to Kwang Wu and Chris Speed and I think so many other players. Andrew D'Angelo was I don't think, or was he?
Andrew was in the band.
Andrew was also, right? Yeah, and everyone mentioned this group, and it seemed to be like this. I don't know how to phrase it, but like this joining point of incredible musicians that you created there. How important was that for you, actually, and how did that begin? What was the story behind there?
Well, it was kind of a convergence. I think that's the word you were looking for.
Okay, yeah, exactly.
Of musicians, it was a good time. As I said, it was a good time to be in Boston. A lot of these guys in my class and the year after, I was coming back to do recitals in 1983 and also in 84, and got to meet people like Adam Coker, Bruce Barth, and Bruno Rayberg, who still teaches at Berkeley, a great bass player. And then who else was in that early band? Well, Matt Darriau, he and I were we're great buddies and playing in all sorts of situations. But we decided that by 1984 that we wanted to do something as a collective. And also the model was like a jazz workshop, a la Mingus or something like that. And, try experimenting and writing for each other. And then trying to figure out the size of the band. We didn't want to be a big band. That would have been too unwieldy to put together and whatever, try to get rehearsals. And we also felt that we wanted to be slightly larger than a no-net. And my model for that time happened to be the Lee Konitz no-net, which I thought was a great ensemble, and I love the arrangements, and I love the sound and the textures that they got. This is like the early 80s. And there were other large ensembles that I started to gravitate to and listen to. And then we decided, well, let's try, putting a band that's like 11 pieces, maybe 3 trumpets, 2 trombones, 3 saxes, piano, bass, and drums. And then we added percussion as well. So it became a 12-piece band. And Orange Then Blue was born just out of the wish to start to write for that particular instrumentation. We also were thinking along the lines of Gil Evans. That was a favorite arranger of ours.
Sure.
And the combination of Charles Mingus as well. So with all that, we decided that our theme song should be the Orange Was the Color of Her Dress, Then Silk Blue, which is the Charles Mingus tune that Gil Evans arranged for his own band back in the during the 80s, I guess.
80s,
and then the color Orange Then Blue, just shrinking that title, and those colors vibrate when put together, and so it was a nice kind of mantra to adhere to and to follow and to see what direction we went into, and everybody composed. It was about 7 of us who came out of those conservatory years, who were the guys, the core group, and then we added those other 5 players. People. And then it sort of evolved, and people left, and some got busy. Bruno got busy and went back to, I think, Sweden or something like that. And Dave Clark was our bass player for a long time, and Bruce got busy and went to New York, and we had other pianists that came in like Bevan Manson and Tim Ray, and Tim Hagen's got a chance to play with us and record with us as well as, and another great trumpet player, Greg Gisbert, was with us for a minute, but he didn't end up on any formal recordings with us. And then it started. We were looking for more experimental things. I guess Matt, Darriau, and I had the idea that I would look for more experimental things, and then Matt was looking for more Eastern European kind of things or Irish things. Or, he's very much into world music. So we started to pull in some Balkan ideas, all these things like that. And he had a thing that he put together of Irish melodies. And then, we got people like Chris Speed to join us, because we knew about Chris from his group called Human Feel, which, was a quartet that blew my mind because of the, what they were doing with Kurt Rosenwinkel and Andrew D'Angelo and Jim Black. And that was quite an influence on me, in terms of what they were doing. But I thought Chris would be great with the band, and there was an opportunity for him to join us. Later on, we got Andrew D'Angelo and Chris Speed and Andy Laster in that one period where we went to Berlin. And there's some great YouTube that exists of us playing
with this lineup.
Berlin jazz. Yeah, with that saxophone section.
Oh man, I have to find
including you said Kung Vu was in the trumpet section. Peck Almond was a trumpet player who played soprano saxophone. Who am I leaving out on the trumpets? It wasn't Herb Robertson, but it was
Dave Douglas? No.
no, Dave Ballou. Dave Ballou.
Okay.
Yeah, he was also the third trumpet player.
Beautiful.
I'm just talking about that period when we went to Berlin. We did have Dave Douglas play with us also.
I know.
And that was for that recording we did in Canada at that was as a result of doing the tours in Western Canada for all those festivals. And we ended up at Banff to record there. And Dave Douglas was also a huge influence on us, on me. And he infused this other thing that, that overtook the band. And that's when the band was kind of half Boston, half New York. And, you had the carnivores versus the vegetarians and things like that. And, some of the more beboppy guys versus the more avant, stretching the bar line kind of guys like Chris Speed and Andy Laster and Dave Douglas. And, I had Mark Taylor, the great French horn player in there. So anyway, the band had kind of gone through all these kind of evolutions. And our final gig was at the Knitting Factory in 1997, sorry. And by then we had Tony Malaby in the band, Herb Robertson.
Yeah.
And Jamie Saft. Wow. I guess Reed Anderson was still playing with us, or somebody like that. But anyway, it's just, you had a pool of players you could always draw from.
Sure.
The challenge, I was going to say that the challenge was, trying to find time to rehearse all our challenging, charts. A lot of it was conceptual. And so you had to sort of explain what you were looking for at times. Others were, you kind of read down what's written, but it was a lot of moving parts. And then the other challenge was just trying to get gigs. And we ended up with 5 nice recordings on the GM record. We got to Europe at least once. We got to the Midwest a couple times. We got to Canada a few times. But I was payrolling, I was the guy the guy that had to make all the phone calls and because the others, that idea of a collective disappeared probably, certainly about 3 months after Orange and Blue was formed. And I became the straw boss, and
that's a lot
of
work.
To sort of payroll the whole thing. And, if we were going to the Midwest, I had to put everything on a credit card. And, I accumulated quite a debt that I couldn't climb out of for almost, I would say, 15 years. And, I always thought, I'll pay it off, so what? But by 97, I was thinking, I just can't do this anymore. And we did release one last record in 99. And I just thought I'd better start, forming smaller bands.
I wanted to ask you how kind of you answered it now, but how you started, all these other groups. I love that one with Malaby and is it Garzone? Tenor Tantrums?
Yeah, man,
that's a killing record, by the way.
That was a fun group. Yeah, that was my Schuldogs group, which was really, really to revolve around my brother and myself. And initially it was George Garzone and Tony Malaby at the time. But they're both my favorite, saxophonists.
Yeah.
But Garzone was very busy, and the idea was to find another saxophonist that could sort of fill in for Garzone. And I tried Ellery Escalin, but he was too busy. And we ended up with Tim Byrne for a tour and at least one recording. And also we had Mark Elias, who was filling in for my brother when my brother was busy, because he was still living in Berlin half the year and coming to the US half the year. So, he wasn't always available, and he was also touring with all sorts of folks. And that lasted for a few years. Then we got, interestingly enough, Herb Robertson and Tony Malaby together. And then when Tony couldn't do it with us anymore and he was getting busy, we got Rich Perry finally. So that was the final ensemble, Herb Robertson and Rich Perry. I think Gebhard Ullman also filled in one time.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. Okay.
That was a nice thing.
Oh, that's how you connected with Gebhard.
Yeah. Sorry?
That's how you connected with Gebhard, right? You played in his band also.
Well, I started to connect with Gebhard because of Conference Call, which was a group that was really led by Michael Jeffrey Stevens, Joe Fonda, and Gebhard. And they were looking for a new drummer because Matt Wilson was too busy. And I think they did something with Han Beneek. And maybe they tried out a couple other drummers. But anyway, I said, oh, yeah, I'm going to play with these guys. And they were really resourceful because they got all these gigs in Europe and Canada. And we pretty much got together at least twice or three times a year, either the tour in the US or tour in Europe. And we made a few recordings, and that was great. That lasted about 10 years. But that's, and then, that sort of overlapped with the Schuldogs. At the same time, I formed this group called Chump Change, which was my detour band, the band that played at this club on 13th Street.
Yeah, I played there once. Yeah.
Right. And it was a great little venue, pretty smoky, pretty loud, all the time. But Tom Beckham, the Vibes player who I got to play with all the time, was playing there. And so that got me introduced to that scene at Detour. And then I wanted to form this group with Tom as the Vibes player and Dave Ambrosio, a longtime beautiful bass player.
Yeah, he's really great. Yeah.
And the first group was, it was really, it was Ingrid Jensen and Donnie McCaslin. That's how it, I did try, and I'm forgetting his name, and I feel bad about that. We did try a trumpet player who played with us once, but he immediately moved to the West Coast. I'll think of his name. But anyway, so it was Ingrid and Donnie. And then Ingrid got busy, and I decided to add Brad Shepik as guitar. And then Donnie got busy, and I got Peter Alphabom. So no, that band still exists. I mean, I haven't been really booking too much lately because the pandemic put a real dent in everything, and just trying to
I wanted to ask you.
I
wanted to ask you, what's your story? I have quite some albums of you, and I love your. I mean, I want to ask you also about your composing, otherwise, but. Like, what's happening, especially in the department of you as a band leader? I mean, are you planning to put out a new record, or like which of these groups are still alive in a way? Or
well, it's a lot of things going on right now. I'm kind of still waiting for things to chill out if they ever do, travel wise. Also, just getting gigs here in New York is kind of a chore. I mean, I know where I can certainly get the band to play, but these one-shot deals, they may be somewhat satisfying, but it's like just one shot. I mean, the last time Circle Wide played was in 2019 in New Mexico, in Albuquerque. And that was a great gig. It was great. In fact, it'd been 4 years since we had played. So, I don't know, maybe in 4 years, maybe next year I'll get the band out. I'm kind of waiting. I'm kind of being in a position where, it's just such a chore to find gigs and pull music together. And I'm enjoying being a sideman because I don't have all those worries so much. All those things that you have to deal with as a band leader.
Sure.
and as a sideman, I'm getting a few gigs here and there, but not that many. You know, I'm playing more in the Berkshires than I am playing here in New York. I'm I'm sort of in a reflective mode right now, and I'm kind of thinking, well, is this my career kind of winding down as a drummer, or is there more room for me to do things and compose and and I think there is more room. I just don't know when I'm going to do that. And
yeah, I love
I'm
your
busy
composing always. I mean, like,
well, thank you. Yeah.
there's,
I mean, look,
you know,
I think it's there's still something in me to do that. There's actually recordings that I've never put out. In fact, all the way back to Orange and Blue
really,
that I started checking out, during the pandemic, and these live things that we did when we first formed, and I was going, man, this is not bad. This should come out in some way. And
oh man, Bandcamp, come on, or something.
well, I look, that's
At
another reason why I've been hesitating, because the whole thing about putting out a CD is so different than what it was even 5 years ago.
Completely.
And it's like you put all that effort into getting a CD out, but nobody buys CDs anymore.
Yeah.
And then the whole thing of, okay, so you got it streaming, is that, what, is that satisfying? Is that,
yeah, I know
these CDs that we put together were stories, those were our little, I don't know, biographical books that we would put out, and we have a beginning and a middle and an end. And but nobody cares about that. They just, maybe they'll want to hear one tune from a streaming link and Spotify or whatever. And so again, it's just, I don't know what to make of that and how to promote a CD these days.
Oh man, yeah.
I mean, if I was touring in Europe more, maybe there is a market for people to buy CDs over there.
Just gigs. I mean, when we had this October tour, I sold quite a lot of music, CDs.
Right.
But it was only on the concerts, and that's it. And it's a valid question. Where's the future of actually albums, in a way, of this kind of music? Whatever, modern jazz or what we play, I don't know.
And I may not have the name that's going to bring a lot of people to my website or anything like that, or if I make an announcement on Facebook, how many people are going to say, oh yeah, I got to go out and buy that, or send me a copy, man. I'll give you $5 for it.
Yeah, it's terrible if you think about it.
Or not even, send me a copy, man.
I know
freebie.
what you mean.
I'll take a freebie. Look, I admire all these other folks, either of my generation or younger, that are still doing it. That they're still putting out music, and even on vinyl. And that's a whole nother world. In fact, you have to wait longer to get your vinyl releases. So you wait a year, it comes out, you're already onto new projects. Who knows? I don't know. I mean, it becomes a vanity issue. Is this why I put out CDs? Just for my own vanity, for my own, self,
that's a valid question.
What's the word? Gradulation? I don't even know what the word is. Self-congratulation, or
exactly.
So anyway, I'm looking at this sort of as a, it's not the end of the world for me in terms of that, but I'm also very busy doing all this archiving, which I find very satisfying. And
oh man, sure.
It's all this mystery of things that I've been able to come across has been amazing. So I'm sure you're going to ask me about that. But anyway, that's my point. I still have one band that I'm still, thinking I'll dust off the cobwebs. As far as the Schulldogs go, that had its run, and I don't know if there's ever a reason to pull that band together again. There's been talk about forming Orange and Blue again for a reunion, because we always come up with the 35th year or 40th anniversary.
That would be a cool band to go to Europe with now. with
Well, yeah, but who's going to pay for that?
yeah, that's a different story.
You know?
But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the things that we didn't have, and I was very jealous of all these European ensembles, like the Vienna Art Orchestra and Pierre Dor's Jungle Orchestra, and there was also in Holland William Breuker
and
Collective,
ICP also, yeah.
ICP,
yeah.
Delightful Precipice. These bands came over to the US, and they were all sponsored by their governments, and so it didn't matter where they played, because they got, they're all going to be paid well, I suppose. I mean, at least the band leaders weren't going to lose money.
Definitely.
I should find out from Django Bates and all those guys to see how they did with all those fairly involved tours. But when we had to get to Europe, there was you get the festival money, but that was just to cover the band. And then you had to make sure that they got over there on, and you paid for all the flight tickets. So I was kind of jealous of those guys that were able to come over to our country and do all these wonderful things. It was great to see them live too. I mean, I think I saw, except for the ICP, I think I got to see all those bands that I mentioned.
Oh wow!
Yeah, at least once.
Yeah,
and every time it was like, oh my God, is this how they do that? And it's just as important as what the JCOA did in the 70s, and some of those other more experimental large ensembles that we know about from our end here in the US.
Interesting. Yeah, it's different there. Yeah, I mean, you have the grants. That's one thing, I guess, that people rely on nowadays. But in the past, maybe that was not so much present, right?
Well, okay. Let me say that we did get a State Department tour that was well funded, but I couldn't bring the whole band over. It was just a 7-piece version. So we called ourselves Orange Then Light Blue, and we toured in Turkey, in Cyprus, and in Syria.
Wow, man!
This was 1994.
Wow.
And so yes, we got one chance to do that.
Yeah, but it's not enough to develop something and keep it going. Like Norway has this incredible support for their musicians.
Right, and as it should be, as it very well should be. And when I played in Switzerland, I'd ask these guys who were teachers there, or musicians playing in Switzerland. Their studios are paid for. Their whatever. I think their instruments are paid for.
Almost, exactly.
Yeah, it's like oh my God, man. Big jealousy about that. Whatever, we've done well. Some of us have done really well over here, and we wouldn't have it any other way, I suppose.
Yeah, but I wanted to ask you, before about your composing, because you said you basically had to make up everything in those 2 years at NEC,
NEC,
and then you still, when I look at your discography and the records I have, you wrote a lot of compositions. And how did this go with you, or still does? I mean, like, what was your process there, and how easy in a sense, or not easy, was it for you?
It wasn't easy. I think, it was a bit of catch up, as I said, at New England Conservatory, but also it was. I should mention that Carl Atkins, who was the director of the jazz programming at NEC for the first 2 years that I was there, he was quite a mentor and an influence on me, because he taught jazz history, and so that got me involved with trying to hear a lot of music.
Yeah.
And then Pat Hollenbeck also taught a jazz arranging class. So I was getting my chances to write, it was just thrown into the fire and see what sticks. But I also feel like my dad, and having, him knowing the music that I was surrounded by, somehow that filtered in and bubbled around and helped me, hear things and put together that puzzle of writing a large ensemble work. And I even listened to something I had arranged back in I think it was 1980 or 81.
Oh wow!
For big band. This is way before Orange and then Blue, and it's not bad. It's kind of a reading of my some arrangement of My Romance.
Okay.
And I use a Ricky Ford solo that for the sax soli section. Everybody's struggling through, so it's not. You can kind of hear that I was going for something.
Quite cool.
Anyway, it was all trial and error, and I'm not a pianist, so I was pounding out things on piano. This is before you had the luxury of a sequencer to hear things back. Software stuff. But I kind of marvel at, Jesus, I wrote these things out and I had to write out all the parts, and some of it was pretty good and some of it was, I threw away, or I still have, maybe I'll get back to it. But I learned a lot from those experiences, starting with NEC and then with Orange Then Blue, getting those chances to write for that band. And then also checking out Thad Jones charts, for the Thad Jones Mel Lewis Orchestra, getting scores to look at. Gil Evans, of course, Duke Ellington, and my dad had a lot of transcribed Ellington scores, so I took advantage of that to check that out. So it was kind of, I guess I didn't really hook on to any composition or arranger for further studies. That would have, I maybe should have taken advantage of that, especially with Herb Pomeroy around. I don't know, there was a bunch of, Jimmy Jufrey, even guys like that were teaching. Jackie Byard, oh my God, there's another one that I could have hooked up with, since he was teaching, and he kind of overlapped when I was at NEC. I didn't take advantage of that, and I should have.
You hooked up with Rand Blake, right? I think.
Well, Rand Blake, and that was basically, as a performer. I did enroll into the third stream department. I was more in the jazz department. But I always admired Rand, and the recordings we did. He got me actually my first recording, my first actual, when I show up on an LP.
That's like film noir. That one.
Film noir.
Okay.
So it was one track. It was Dr. Mabusa.
But still, come on,
something like that. And then I got to play with Rand in various concerts. He's a very unusual pianist. So, as a drummer, you really have to sort of understand where he's coming from and fit into his sphere. Especially when we did that, the double CD. Maybe you can help me with that, with Rand and my brother. What the hell is it called? Sometimes, you've done a few recordings and you can't come up with the titles of these things. Anyway, that was a trio recording that we did. So that's Rand playing with a rhythm section. And, that's a challenge in itself, because he wasn't known to play with rhythm sections necessarily.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that was because my dad was insisting that he do this, and he produced this particular recording. Sonic Temples is what it's
Oh
called.
shit, I don't know this one. Okay, I have
Sonic
to find it.
Temples, yeah.
I have to find
Double
it.
CD. And so my brother, and I worked hard to rehearse with Ran, and we recorded in this sort of very open space. It's a nice recording. And Nicole Kampkin, who's my brother's wife, plays alto saxophone on a few tracks.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. So, and it's basically just about Ran and the tunes that he loves to play. But my dad got him to play at least one composition of my father's and one composition of my brother's.
Oh, okay.
And I think one composition of mine too. Yeah.
Okay.
So, we had to make Ran read a few things,
Okay, that's good.
He's a reluctant reader.
Yeah.
But such a beautiful musician. He's still with us, and I love him dearly.
That's beautiful.
So I don't know where we were going with this. Composing thing.
Composing, yeah.
And then, when I got to the smaller bands, that still was a challenge, just to figure out how to write for Ingrid Jensen and Donnie McCaslin, and also the instrument, the vibes instrument, which is different from the piano. And then, when Ingrid left and we put guitar in that group, then you had to sort of figure out that texture, which is guitar, two rhythm chordal instruments, putting those two together. Brad is such a beautiful musician because he can sort of, he can complement anything. So it wasn't like, they were cluttering that, bed of sound. But it was to complement each other, and Tom and Brad just worked beautifully. In fact, they've done a couple.
They've done a
together.
couple of records. Yeah.
And then also composing for two saxophones, bass, and drums. That was a lot of fun.
I love those.
There, you didn't necessarily have to think about chords, but there was more about this kind of, I don't know if you call it ground bass kind of thing that would be happening.
It's like ornatish vibe. I always
it's coming out of that tradition of any
really good
group, that had no piano or guitar. I mean, of course, Sonny Rollins. It was another kind of example of that.
Yeah,
but certainly the Fringe in Boston. That was an example of that, and I loved hearing them, and I got to play with them too. When Bob Galati was busy. But and then certainly all the experimental things that were going on in the 60s and 70s that didn't necessarily use piano.
Yeah.
I have to say another influence for me, something that really helped me absorb and be a sponge to all this kind of music, was being a radio DJ. At a radio station in Boston, particularly in Cambridge at MIT. I started in high school as a volunteer, which is kind of remarkable to me to know that here I am coming out of a prep school, getting a chance to do a 2-hour jazz program every week on WMBR, starting in 1977, or maybe even 76. I can't remember. Anyway, I did that for 8 years at that station. Wow. And so you get a chance to go through the record library. You do all these programs. You do all these things you put together, the set lists. And it helped me figure out how to be a leader too, because, this is how you put a set list together, right? As a band leader. So you're doing that on radio as well. And then opening my ears up to all these different recordings that I hadn't known about, including the Blue Notes and the Prestiges and the Riversides, and then the more advanced and eclectic things that came from the Jazz Composers Orchestra Alliance Association. And all those little labels, all those independent labels, Indian Navigation.
Yeah, so much music,
Delmark.
Crazy.
Inner City. What else? I mean, so and then I became the jazz director there as well. So I was going in that record library almost every time I was there to clean that up because it was all a mess, and there were a lot of things missing. And you know, I was able to get Fantasy Records to send us all those prestige twofers to fill up the library.
Yeah.
And that's how I was starting to understand really the history of jazz, as well as working with my dad on his book, The Swing Era, and finding recordings for him to listen to and annotating in those discographies, those big green discographies. And my father was being very thorough about going through each of those 78s that he had to listen to. And at that time, there was this whole reissue period.
Yeah.
For a lot of those Tommy Dorsey's, Glenn Miller's, Duke Ellington's, Jimmy Lunsford's, on and on, and Claude Thornhill's. And so those are all those things that he was going to check out thoroughly. I mean, literally listening to every alternate take or whatever.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so I was there downstairs working with him and finding these things and going out to used record stores and you know, things like that. But that was also, I mean, great for me to understand.
Sure.
You know, all these amazing drummers from the 20s and 30s, Baby Dodds, Chauncey Morehouse, you know, on to Gene Krupa, and then
Sure.
you know, the drummers for Duke Ellington, and the transitional drummers like Sid Catlett, and Joe Jones, and on to the bebop guys, Max Roach, Roy Haynes, and then, you know, on to Elvin Jones, Tony Williams.
Evolution,
and understanding where all that lies, you know, Art Blakey, Kenny Clark, Connie Kay. Oh my God, it's just, you know, Pete LaRocca. It's just it never ends. And now I'm kind of doing that again right now, just going through Lee Konitz's archive and Herb Pomeroy's. And
how did you actually end up with these archives?
Well,
I mean,
you know, I had always a sort of a hand in my dad's archive, and a lot of that's now at the Library of Congress. But I still have things and recordings, and still trying to go through a lot of his reels. So transferring process, you know, digitizing everything. When Lee passed away, Lee Konitz, you know, I was aware of what a few things he had, few recordings, but you know, I also said, you know, to the family that I would be, you know, willing to come down to the apartment and help you guys figure out what to do with his, especially his instruments. You know, he had 5 alto saxophones and things like that in his closet, his major saxophone, you know, one of these that he played for the Birth of the Cool, things like that. Because I didn't, you know, we were thinking, oh my God, you know, this is maybe the family was thinking they'd sell them or something like that. And thank God they weren't thinking that way particularly. But he had a piano in there in his studio and things like that. So I was thinking, okay, I'm going to work on that. And also his manuscript. And there was all these things that I knew that were on his shelves. And also, sorry. Also, I was very interested in trying to find his folders of the no-net that he had in the late 70s and early 80s. Because I never asked him about that, and then it suddenly dawned on me, oh my God, where are those? You know, and I never could find them. So the family said, yes, please come down to the apartment. We have the apartment for another year. The lease will be up in April of 2021. So I started working in there in June of 2020. And then I realized, oh my God, there's all these recordings. There's this huge box full or crate full of cassettes, about 1,200 cassettes.
What?
Also in his dresser. Well, we actually we migrated all the cassettes into his dresser, so it could be easily,
transfer.
we could pull out, it was all numbered from 1 to 1238, something like that. And then there were like 200 reel-to-reels. That was the big surprise. I knew there were 15 reels somewhere on the shelf, and I was thinking, oh, okay, well, he's got a few here. Where the rest, or were there? And sure enough, we found another 180, reels, 7-inch reels.
What are these?
Well, there's all sorts of stuff. So, it's a lot of sessions he did with Warren Marsh.
Wow.
With a bass player named Peter Ind, who,
like unreleased stuff. I mean,
yeah, just casual sessions at Peter Ind's studio. Right? I mean, but other things that extra takes of motion, things that had not been released when they issued the 3 CD complete set of motion. Now I found even more stuff.
Wow.
Then the things he did on Verve. There's some alternate takes that nobody's heard. Things that go back to the earlier mid 50s, live things.
Amazing.
With Billy Bauer. And some things with Tristano. And then later in the mid 60s, we've got sessions with Jim Hall at the Half Note.
Wow.
Other live tracks with Warren Marsh and Roy Haynes. And probably Sonny Dallas. We're not sure who the bass player is, but it's a quartet with Lee and Warren with Roy Haynes.
Wow.
Probably fall of '59. And these are, mono recordings, and they sound good. They're still, they're not falling apart like the reel-to-reel tapes that were issued in the '70s and '80s. Those were more suspect. So they were preserved fairly well. And so I've been slowly getting, I've probably gone through about 100 reel-to-reels.
Wow.
And about another 200 cassettes. That's going to last forever. I have a feeling. And there's DATs. Then there are DATs too, because look, the guy's going through the DAT period.
Sure.
And there's CDs, CDRs. There's extra Charlie Hayden, Brad Meldau stuff from the Blue Note that hasn't come out. There's probably a reason why they chose what they chose, but still, that's
sure. Yeah,
it's friggin' Lee Konitz with Charlie Hayden, and Paul Motion. I volunteered to help out with the Konitz estate, and then they put me on a sort of a payroll to keep it going, and I'm grateful to them for that. Especially to Josh, the son, Josh Konitz, and also the niece, Linda Konitz, who lives in Chicago. And she was the one who really was coming to New York all the time and, trying to guide Josh through the whole mess of
procedure,
the estate issues. I went through that with my dad. It gets messy sometimes. And then, Josh had to sort of, was still working the rest of his siblings who are in different parts of the country. But they weren't so keen on, claiming things, or, they were very much agreeable to how we were handling all this. The instruments, though, Ohad Talmer was really the one who sort of helped figure that out. And we had another person come in to help, buy those instruments back so that they are preserved and could be placed in places that we choose. And that they wouldn't be necessarily sold on eBay and end up in somebody else's collection, or even played by somebody else, which could happen. But no, I think what's happening is we're kind of in control of where those instruments go, and one of them is already at William Patterson, which is where the archive is going to end up.
Fantastic.
So there's a nice little archival collection that Dave Dempsey has started with Michael Brecker things and Art Farmer and Clark Terry. And Jim McNeely's scores are there. and a few other people I'm not coming up with, but now Lee Konitz's archive is there, and that's after I'm done with the tapes and recordings and transfers, that's where that's all going to.
Yeah. Wow. Well, amazing, man. Wow.
But Dave doesn't quite have the resources to go through every recording and get them transferred the way we have it going over here. But that's just one archive. So I've been going to the New York Public Library to go through the George Avakian collection, which is also coming up with amazing surprises because he was there from the beginning of jazz, practically, to till he was 97, 98, I think, and he was with RCA and Columbia and Miles and Sonny Rollins and Charles Lloyd and Keith Jarrett. And oh my God, there's all this other stuff that nobody's heard, So
no, but fantastic that you're doing that. I mean, just if to preserve the history, I like that. It's
yeah, no, it's now
beautiful job.
I mean that's another collection that I've had the privilege of going through, and they allow me to go in the staff rooms in the staff area, and there were a lot of unmarked reel-to-reels. That's why I was really thinking I should go in there and see if I can identify any of that stuff. And some of it I was able to do that. Others are still a mystery.
That's amazing. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
So cool.
And then the collection of Rashid Ali we've been going through with two other like-minded researchers, Ben Young and Joe Lizzie. And we've actually been able to release a few recordings on the Survival label.
Okay, I have to find that.
Getting Survival to be released again. And the Herb Pomeroy archive, which is up in MIT, and I've been given special access to go through that because Herb had an unbelievable legacy in Boston.
Yeah.
And then what else? And my brother's collection, which does include some Bob Moses, by the way. My brother played with Bob.
Yeah, sure.
Back in the day. But also we've come across some of the first gigs the Paul Motion Quintet did in Boston. My brother recorded this, when they had Billy Drews and Joe Lovano and Doug Frizzell.
Yeah, that's one of the best bands.
And,
wow.
And it sounds great. And, and everything. There's also these recordings from the TV station WGBH in Boston, radio also. But there was this program called Jazz, half-hour TV program in the mid-'60s that Herb Pomeroy was hosting. And I always known about this program for years, but I was wondering, well, where are these TV programs? Are they preserved, And unfortunately, a lot of that's been lost because of the whole the way they were recording them from kinescope and 2-inch video, which had to be used over, or or they just willy-nilly threw them out, without knowing what it was, which is tragic. But there's a lot of audio that has been preserved. Wow. And so you got, Rassan Roland Kirk Quartet, or you got Art Farmer Quintet, or you got Sonny Rollins Trio, or you got Abbey Lincoln, with Cedar Walton and Jack T. Jeanette in 1965. So, those are things that we've come across and we're trying to preserve. And trying to figure out what to do with that. And meanwhile, we came across another collection of live broadcasts from the Storyville and the Hi-Hat in Boston from the 50s, mid-50s. And that's another amazing collection that we've started to go through. And it's just endless.
It's incredible, man. Yeah, that's
I'm
wow.
losing my voice just talking about it.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah, no wonder you don't have time to lead a band now. I mean, come on, it's like
I know. Well, I
it's like
mean, but in a way, I'm feeling like I'm in a band,
yeah,
because I
yeah.
get
Oh
to hear
man,
all the stuff
so
that
beautiful
nobody
to do
else has
that.
heard, and
I'm
you know,
jealous.
um, yeah, one of the just to give you a little idea of what I discovered at the New York Public Library. It wasn't in the George Avakian collection. It was in another collection. This guy who happened to preserve tapes, and his friend was this engineer, Richard Alderson, who recorded uh, people like Sonny Rollins and Nina Simone in the early '60s from places like the Jazz Gallery and
Mm.
a couple other places I can't remember. Also, he famously recorded Bob Dylan. And this is 60, 61. And then there's this Coltrane recording with Eric Dolphy
Wow.
and McCoy and Elvin and the two bass players, Art Davis and Reggie Workman.
Ooh.
So this is before Jimmy Garrison joins the band.
Wow.
And they're doing a version of Africa, which, at first when I was hearing it, I was going, God, what? Oh, this is Africa. Oh, this is a live version of Africa, which I kind of knew that there wasn't a live version of this ever, that there was only that studio recording with the large ensemble
Yeah, yeah.
that Eric Dolphy,
That's
did the
incredible.
arrangements for. So here's Coltrane playing the melody and Eric doing, what the background figures that he had written for the studio recording, which was, the studio thing had happened already in the spring, I think, of 1961. So this is like late August. We're thinking
Wow.
late August, early September. And it's a 22, 23-minute version of Africa. And it sounds great. And
Wow.
there are 4 other tracks that were in that collection that other people knew about, folks like Lewis Porter. I think Ravi Coltrane knew about this. But so it's another recording with Eric, I believe, but with Garrison. So it's later, and
Wow.
it's green sleeves and impressions, and the sort of the tracks that he was going, or the repertoire that he was always going to play. And the whole point of getting Ravi Coltrane to come down to the New York Public Library to check out Africa was that, he had to hear this. And we also got the guy from Verve, Ken Drucker, to come down, who is the guy that decides what, next Impulse record is going to be released. So, and I had Lewis Porter there too. And so we all had to figure out, is this really the Jazz Gallery and, that kind of thing. And so this is going to, or Village Gate, that was the other thought.
Yeah,
It was the Village Gate. I guess it is the Village Gate, not the Jazz Gallery. The Jazz Gallery is the stuff with Sonny Rollins, and that's a whole nother thing. Just after he retired, just after he came out of retirement, that's another story.
Oh,
Anyway,
man,
the point being,
incredible.
Ken Drucker now said that this is going to be the next Coltrane release, and Robbie's giving it the green light, and they're ready to release it sometime next year.
Wow.
Along with those 4 other tracks,
I'm such a Dolphy fan, man. I'm more happy because it's gonna be Dolphy playing. It's like,
well, there's then actually going through Avakian. Here's another thing that I came across: recordings with Chico Hamilton, with Eric Dolphy and Ron Carter.
Wow.
And it's supposedly Ron Carter's first commercial recording in fall of '59. And it never came out because Chico was in transition from, I think, from World Pacific to Warner Brothers, or Warner Brothers to whatever the next label was.
Yeah.
And so was George Avakian, who was producing these sessions. So here they're sitting in his collection, all these years. And it's, it's funny little tracks. They're like 2-3 minutes long.
Yeah, this blues kind of version.
Well, but there's an approach. There's a thing that Chico was into, and Eric is the only soloist basically. But here's Ron Carter playing all blues, for instance, of which he was going to play thousands of times with Miles about 3-4 years later. So I'm trying to get Ron to come down to the New York Public Library. I would love to have him listen to this, just to see what he thinks. I believe this could be his first recording. So
that's incredible.
Ron Carter is the world's most recorded bass player.
Sure,
yeah. So that's
incredible, man. Wow.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Anyway, that's my stories of the archiving.
No, but beautiful, man. Thanks for sharing some of this stuff, George. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And I'm willing to check you out. I want to see. You have enough stuff on YouTube, right?
Yeah. I'll send you. I mean, I that's why I do this stuff, for the love of music, also, and just to make an archive of musicians, and their what they did, and hopefully preserve some of the stories, and how something was happening, even if it's like your group, or wherever, like everything has connections, and you build lines, and it's like, man, that's how this formed, and and it's already 40 years ago what you guys did, so that's how I look at it, and it's I think it's important to do that. So
it doesn't feel like a long time, but it was already.
It is,
almost 4 years ago that I was playing with my band for that festival.
Bizarre.
But I just recently played with a great pianist named Ted Rosenthal. Doing his arrangements of Christmas tunes. But they were a lot of fun to play, and they're all got a little twisted thing in there. So I had to read my ass off on a few of those things. That's another thing that during the pandemic, when you weren't playing that much, and when you just to set your eyes on notes again, get your reading chops up again. That's something I felt like I lost a little bit. Chop wise, I definitely lost a few, I don't know, RPMs, I guess.
Sure,
something like that. I mean, how was it with you? I gather you guys were shut down, and
I mean, I use it well. I practiced every day a lot, and did I did like an Eric Dolphy solo acoustic guitar album.
Which solo?
I transcribed all of Dolphy's every melody he wrote, every composition. I got 28 of them, and then I did arrangements for solo acoustic 6 and 12 string guitar. I'll send you a link.
Wow, that's amazing.
That was my COVID project. I was
first
to get down kind of the 2-horn arrangement with a bass line, all on one. How to arrange that, Freddie or Eric, and then the bass line, and like the vibes sometimes, or
beautiful.
So that was fun. So,
well, we did this project of Out to Lunch with Russ Johnson.
Oh man, really?
Russ Johnson, the trumpet player.
The trumpet player. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and this was a group that we pulled together specifically to do the music of Eric Dolphy.
Really? Okay.
And Roy Nathanson was the alto saxophonist, and we had Myra Melford on piano.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And Brad Jones on bass. And we called it Still Out to Lunch. And so it was a lot of fun. It was basically to do remakes of those tunes on that album. Russ did a great job of really dissecting and trying to figure out whether the heads just went into just free improv, but no, there were actually bass lines that Richard
Yeah.
Davis,
Yeah.
you know, kept up with.
Yep.
And I remember talking to Bobby Hutcherson once and asking him, did you guys have parts? And he said, yes, there were definitely parts that we were, you know, reading from. And some of those ended up at the Library of Congress, which I had a firsthand look when I was down there.
Oh, wow.
This was while my dad was alive, so it was way before all this estate issues with my dad. And that box of Eric Dolphy music had just arrived. And they gave me access down, you know, they took me through the tunnels there and into the part of the Madison building in the basement. And there's the box, and I got a chance to look through
The X-Files.
like the first like lead sheets, and there's Dolphy's handwriting.
Oh, amazing.
It was pretty amazing. But I also had access to a recording that really very few people had heard of Eric Dolphy leading a quintet at Town Hall in 1962 with Edward Armour and I'm forgetting. Oh, Herbie Hancock.
Really?
How would I forget him? Richard Davis and J.C. Moses.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It was a concert that was shared with a poet named Ray Dragonette, who happened to, you know, have some interesting, very ethereal kind of subjects, but some of it had to do with Egypt, ancient Egypt, but also there was a reference to Thelonious Monk in one of her readings. And I think Eric had access to these poems before that concert. So he put some music together based on her poems.
Oh, wow.
And one of the tunes was, and now I'm forgetting this song for, let me see if I can pull this up. I just saw it. Here it is. By the way, that's the.
Oh, yeah.
That's
It's an album, actually. Okay, I have to find it. Okay.
Yeah, it came out on Enja.
Okay, I have to find it.
And so it was called Song for the Ram's Horn. And this is before I had that access to the Library of Congress collection. And I decided I was going to try to transcribe this particular piece that was played on that concert that nobody's heard, basically. And for quintet. And I was going to see if we could, you know, pull it into the repertoire for the Out to Lunch band. And it was great thing for me to do, to transcribe something that was fairly hard to figure out. You know, it's Eric, and the chords that are underneath are hard to hear. But it seemed like it was representative of what was played that night. So I get to the Library of Congress, you know, a few months later. I think we had recorded already too, that tune. And then I saw that chart, you know, in those first 10 lead sheets. And there's their score that has the initials SFTRH. And I said, oh my God, could this be Song for the Ram's Horn? And I look at it, it's Eric Dolphy's score of that particular tune.
Oh.
And you know, I'm screaming basically. And, you know, this is like a Saturday morning, this huge room, and there's nobody there except the guy that brought me down there. And I said, can I take a photo of this? I've been working on this. And you know, he allowed me to do that. And that was nice. I also took photos of some lead sheets of Out to Lunch and the other tunes that we did, you know, like Garzone and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Straight up and down. But yeah, so there's Songs for Ram's Horn, and I'm thinking, oh, you know, I got it sort of right, but yeah, I missed this and I missed that. So I was pretty proud that I had, you know, figured this out without having seen that score. But it was such a thrill to you know, suddenly, you know, hear, what is it now, 50, 60 years later, these things come together, you know, like, how does that happen? And the other sort of weird miracle is that, you know, my father's collection has these third stream scores and parts when he worked with Eric Dolphy. Except Dolphy's parts, the original parts, were not in my father's collection.
Ah, okay.
Well, now they show up in Eric Dolphy's collection, and they're both at the Library of Congress, those
Wow.
two collections. And so here's the original parts. I guess Dolphy, I don't know, he didn't steal them, but he
Well,
was
he took him, yeah, kind of. Or
thinking, oh, I'm going to hold on to them because, Gunther's going to ask me to play these again. And I think Gunther said, fine, or he didn't know. I don't know. But
that's
it
amazing.
was kind of a revelation to come across the original parts for Eric Dolphy that Eric had of my father's music. So it's kind of, I guess, a small world, as they say.
It is.
Anyway, this Still Out to Lunch thing was very meaningful to me to do that, to tell the story of how Gunther used to play, these well, there was another piece we did of my dad's called Little Blue Devil, which was the movement from his piece, Jazz Quartet and Orchestra, that he had written for the Modern Jazz Quartet. No, I'm sorry. No, this is a piece that Little Blue Devil is a movement from 7 studies on themes of Paul Klee that my father wrote, and this is the jazz movement of the Paul Klee being the great abstract painter.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to adapt this for Still Out to Lunch Band. My father had done an adaptation of that movement for a small group of third stream players that included classical and jazz guys, and Eric Dolphy was part of that.
Oh.
And so there are these live performances of Little Blue Devil that they did, at up in Syracuse, and at the Ojai Festival in California. And so this is like the third version, where I even pared it down even more to just this quintet. And so the connection of Eric Dolphy and my father and was very meaningful to me. And so we pulled that off on the recording as well.
Man, you have to send me the picture of some of the lead sheets, just that I see them.
Yeah,
if you have those, like from Garzone or whatever, like how that looks.
Yeah. By now, people I'm sure have shared that. I think if you go to, I'll send you the link of the great researcher for Eric Dolphy.
Oh, okay. Please, yeah.
Alan Saul.
Okay.
Who lives in, I think it's either near Atlanta in Georgia. And he's got an incredible website and all sorts of information about Eric, and then I guess I'm going to have to catch up about what I've discovered. This other stuff that's in Avakian's collection and all that.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's endless.
Yeah. Cool. Great, George. I mean, I'll leave you be now.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I guess I've gone on a little too long here.
No, come on. Beautiful. That's why we do these talks, just that we, it's about you today. So,